That voice in your head, the one that criticizes you, doubts you, tears you down. You think it's you. But what if it's not? According to Carl Jung, not every voice in your mind belongs to your true self. Some of them are learned, conditioned, internalized, and the most powerful one is the inner critic. That voice in your head never really leaves. It follows you into quiet moments, into decisions, into conversations, into silence. It comments, it evaluates, it interferes, and most of the time, you don't even question it. You just listen. You assume it's you, your thoughts, your judgment, your perspective. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if that voice is not your true self? What if it's something you learned, something you absorbed, something that was placed there over time? Because the inner critic does not appear randomly. It is built slowly, quietly, repeatedly, through experience, through environment, through influence. You weren't born criticizing yourself. You learned how to do it. You learned it through correction, through comparison, through expectation. Moments where you were told, you should do better. That's not enough. Why can't you be like this? Why did you do that? Moments where approval felt conditional, where acceptance depended on performance, where mistakes were not just mistakes, but reflections of your worth. And in those moments, something begins to form, not immediately, but gradually. A voice that starts to mirror what you heard. At first, it feels external. It comes from others, from authority, from people around you. But over time, it moves inward. It becomes internal. You start repeating it to yourself, correcting yourself before others do, judging yourself before anyone else can, protecting yourself by criticizing yourself first. And this is where the inner critic gains power, because it disguises itself as protection. It convinces you that it's helping you, keeping you sharp, keeping you aware, keeping you from failure. It tells you, if I push you harder, you won't make mistakes. If I point out your flaws, you'll improve. If I criticize you, you'll be better. And at some level, that feels logical, because improvement often comes from correction, from awareness, from feedback. But this is different. This is not balanced feedback. This is constant pressure, constant judgment, constant evaluation. There is no pause, no neutrality, no space to simply exist. You are always being assessed, measured, compared. Even in moments where nothing is wrong, the voice still finds something, something to fix, something to question, something to doubt. And over time, that constant presence shapes how you see yourself, not based on who you are, but based on how you've been evaluated. Because the inner critic doesn't reflect your truth. It reflects what you've internalized, what you've absorbed without filtering, without questioning. And this is what Carl Jung pointed toward, that not everything in your mind belongs to your true self. Some parts are constructed, formed by external influence, conditioned by experience. And the inner critic is one of those parts. It is not your core. It is not your essence. It is a layer, a structure, built around you. And the problem is not just that it exists. The problem is that you identify with it. You believe it. You treat it as truth. Because it feels familiar. It feels consistent. It feels authoritative. And familiarity creates trust, even when it shouldn't. Because when something repeats enough, it starts to feel real, even if it isn't. You hear the same thoughts, again and again. You're not ready. You're not good enough. You'll fail. You'll embarrass yourself. And after hearing them enough times, you stop questioning them. You accept them. You integrate them into your self-image. And once that happens, the voice no longer feels separate. It feels like you, like your own thinking, your own judgment, your own conclusion. But that's the illusion, because your true self does not operate like that. It does not attack you. It does not diminish you. It does not constantly pull you down. It observes. It understands. It grows. But it does not destroy. The inner critic does. It creates doubt where there could be confidence, fear where there could be curiosity, hesitation where there could be action. It limits you before you even begin. because it convinces you of an outcome before reality has a chance to unfold. You don't try because it tells you it won't work. You don't speak because it tells you you'll say the wrong thing. You don't move forward because it tells you you're not ready. And all of this happens internally, quietly, automatically, without resistance, because you believe it. And that belief shapes your behavior more than external reality ever could. You are not reacting to what is happening. You are reacting to what the voice predicts will happen. And that is where its control lies, not in volume, but in influence. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be believed. And once it is believed, it directs your choices, your actions, your limits. You begin to live within the boundaries it sets, invisible boundaries, but powerful ones, because they feel real. You avoid risks, not because they are dangerous, but because the voice tells you they are. You hold back, not because you lack ability, but because the voice tells you that you do. You stay small, not because you need to, but because the voice convinces you it's safer. And over time, that becomes your reality. A life shaped not by your potential, but by your internal dialogue. And this is what makes the inner critic so dangerous. Not that it exists, but that it operates unnoticed, unquestioned, unchallenged. You don't see it as separate. You don't recognize it as a pattern. You just experience it as truth. And when something feels like truth, you don't argue with it. You follow it. You adjust to it. You live by it. Even when it limits you. Even when it hurts you. Even when it keeps you from becoming who you could be. And this is where awareness begins. The moment you start to question, not what the voice is saying, but where it's coming from. The moment you pause and notice, this sounds familiar. This feels learned. This feels repeated. Not original, not authentic, but conditioned. And that moment is important because it creates separation, a small distance between you and the voice. And in that distance, something changes. You begin to observe. Instead of automatically believing, you begin to hear the voice instead of becoming it. And that shift is where everything starts. Because as long as you believe, the voice is you. You are controlled by it. But the moment you see it clearly, as something learned, something internalized, something constructed, you begin to take back control, not by fighting it, not by silencing it, but by understanding it, seeing it for what it is, not truth, but repetition, not identity, but conditioning. And that awareness is the first crack in its power. Because once you see that the voice is not you, you no longer have to follow it. Automatically, unconsciously, blindly, you can question it, challenge it, even ignore it. And that possibility changes everything. Because now, you are no longer living under its authority. You are becoming aware of it. And awareness is where the false self begins to lose its hold, and the true self begins to emerge. Once you begin to see the inner critic clearly, something deeper starts to reveal itself. Because the voice is not random. It has a structure, a purpose, a function, and most importantly, a source. The inner critic is not just negativity. It is internalized authority, the voice of everything that once had power over you, stored, repeated, and activated from within. According to Carl Jung, the psyche is not a single voice. It is made of parts, layers, forces, some conscious, some unconscious. And the inner critic belongs to the unconscious. It operates automatically, without permission, without awareness. It speaks before you even realize it. And because of that, it feels like truth, not something you can question, but something you must accept. And this is where its power becomes deeper, because it doesn't just criticize you. It defines you, quietly, consistently. It tells you who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. It says, this is not you. This is too much for you. This is beyond you. And over time, those statements become identity. You begin to shrink into them, shape yourself around them, limit yourself based on them, not because they are real, but because they feel certain. And certainty is persuasive. even when it is false. The inner critic speaks with certainty. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't doubt. It presents its judgments as facts. And that makes it convincing. Because your mind prefers certainty over ambiguity. Even if that certainty is negative, even if it is limiting, it feels safer than not knowing. So you accept it. You follow it. You build your decisions around it. And this creates a hidden structure in your life. A structure of avoidance. You avoid situations where the critic becomes loud. You avoid exposure, risk, uncertainty, because those moments activate it. They bring it forward. They make it louder, more intense, more aggressive. And instead of facing that, you adjust your behavior. You stay within safe boundaries, predictable environments, controlled situations, not because you want to, but because the voice pushes you there. And this is how the false self is maintained, not through force, but through subtle influence, repeated over time, until it feels natural, normal, like this is just who you are. But it is not. It is who you have adapted to be, to avoid discomfort, to avoid judgment, to avoid rejection. Because at its core, the inner critic is protective, not in a healthy way, but in a conditioned way. It believes that by limiting you, it is keeping you safe, safe from failure, from embarrassment, from pain, from exposure. So it creates rules, invisible rules. You must be perfect. You must not fail. You must not look weak. You must not be rejected. And if you break those rules, the critic responds harshly, relentlessly, with judgment, with shame, with doubt. And over time, you learn to obey, not consciously, but automatically. You adjust yourself before the situation even happens. You silence yourself before speaking. You hold back before trying. You retreat before risking. And all of this happens internally, driven by a voice that feels like you, but is not you. And this creates a deep internal conflict because part of you wants to expand, to grow, to express, to move forward. But another part pulls you back, questions you, limits you. And that tension becomes your experience, a constant push and pull between possibility and restriction, between desire and doubt. And the more you try to move forward, the louder the critic becomes, because growth threatens it. New situations, new risks, new expressions, all challenge the structure it has built. And when that structure is challenged, it reacts, not calmly, but intensely. It increases its voice, its pressure, its judgment, trying to pull you back into what feels safe, into what is familiar, even if that familiarity is limiting, even if it keeps you small, because the unknown feels dangerous to it. And this is where many people get stuck. They try to grow, but the internal resistance feels too strong, too convincing, too real. So they stop, they retreat, they go back to what feels manageable. And the critic relaxes. It quiets down because you are back within its boundaries. And this reinforces the pattern. You associate safety with limitation and discomfort with growth. But instead of moving toward growth, you move toward safety because the voice makes it feel necessary. And over time, this becomes your identity. I'm not confident. I'm not capable. I'm not ready. But those are not truths. They are conclusions, formed by repetition, reinforced by avoidance, maintained by the critic. And this is what Jung meant by the false self, a version of you shaped by external influence, internalized and repeated, until it feels real. But it is not your essence. It is a construction, a psychological structure, built to protect, but now limiting, restricting, holding you back. And the problem is not that it exists. The problem is that you identify with it. You believe it is who you are, instead of seeing it as something you carry, something that was formed and can be changed. Because once you begin to see that distinction, everything shifts. You are no longer the voice. You are the one hearing it. You are the observer, not the critic. And that changes your relationship with it. You no longer obey automatically. You begin to question, to notice patterns, to recognize when it appears, what triggers it, what it says, how it repeats itself, and that awareness starts to weaken it. Because the critic relies on unconsciousness, on automatic belief, on blind acceptance. But when you bring awareness to it, it loses that advantage. It becomes visible, recognizable, predictable. And once something is predictable, it is no longer as powerful because you see it coming. You hear it, but you don't immediately believe it. You create space between the voice and your response. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Choice, the ability to respond differently, to not follow the pattern, to not retreat, to not shrink. But that requires practice, because the critic has been there for a long time. It is familiar, automatic, deeply ingrained. So the shift is gradual, not instant. You will still hear it, still feel it, still be affected by it. But slowly, you begin to see it for what it is. Not truth, but conditioning. Not identity, but pattern. And that realization is the beginning of freedom, because you are no longer trapped inside the voice. You are becoming aware of it. And awareness is what separates you from the false self and brings you closer to what is real. At a certain point, you stop asking how to silence the voice, and you start asking something more important. Why is it there at all? Because the inner critic is not random. It is not a glitch. It is not a mistake. It is a structure built with purpose, even if that purpose no longer serves you. According to Carl Jung, anything that lives in the psyche has a function. It exists for a reason. Even the parts that hurt you, even the parts that limit you. And the inner critic is no exception. At its core, it is trying to protect you, but it is protecting you in an outdated way, using old rules, old fears, old interpretations. It was formed in moments where being judged mattered, where making mistakes had consequences, where approval felt necessary, where rejection felt threatening. And in those moments, the mind adapted. It created a voice that would monitor you, correct you, control you, so you wouldn't step out of line, so you wouldn't risk too much, so you wouldn't expose yourself to pain. And at the time, that may have helped. It may have reduced conflict, avoided punishment, maintained acceptance. But what once protected you now restricts you, because the conditions have changed. But the voice has not. It still operates, as if those old environments are present, as if every mistake will lead to rejection, as if every risk will lead to failure, as if every exposure will lead to judgment. And so it keeps you small, careful, controlled, even when you no longer need to be. And this is where understanding becomes crucial. Because if you only see the critic as an enemy, you will try to fight it, suppress it, ignore it, and that creates resistance, internal conflict, more tension, because you are trying to remove something that is deeply rooted. But when you begin to understand it, something shifts. You see that it is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect you in the only way it knows how, through control, through limitation, through constant correction. And that realization changes your approach from resistance to awareness, from rejection to observation. You stop reacting immediately and you start listening differently, not believing what it says, but noticing how it speaks. When it appears, what triggers it, you begin to see patterns. It shows up before risk, before exposure, before something unfamiliar, before something that matters. It becomes louder when you are about to grow, about to step forward, about to move beyond your comfort zone. And that is important because it reveals something. The critic is not strongest when you are failing. It is strongest when you are evolving, because evolution threatens it. Growth disrupts the structure it has built. And when that structure is challenged, it reacts, not calmly, but aggressively. It increases pressure, doubt, judgment, trying to pull you back into what is known, what is safe, what is predictable. And this is where most people misunderstand the experience. They think the discomfort means they are doing something wrong, that the doubt means they are not ready. that the fear means they should stop. But often, it means the opposite. It means you are moving beyond the limits of the false self. And the critic is trying to maintain control. And when you see that clearly, you begin to relate to it differently. You hear the voice, but you don't immediately obey. You feel the doubt, but you don't immediately retreat. You create a pause, a space, between what the voice says and what you choose to do. And in that space, something powerful emerges. Awareness, choice, freedom. Because now, you are no longer acting automatically. You are responding consciously. You can recognize, this is the critic. This is the old pattern. This is not my truth. And that recognition weakens its influence. Not instantly, but gradually. Because the critic relies on repetition, on automatic belief, on unconscious reaction. But when you interrupt that pattern, when you respond differently, you begin to reshape it. You begin to create a new relationship with it, one where it is no longer in control, but still present. Because the goal is not to eliminate the critic. It will not disappear completely. It is part of your psychological structure, but it can change its intensity, its influence, its role. It can move from dominating you to informing you, from controlling you to being something you observe, and sometimes even learn from. Because hidden within the critic is information, not truth, but signals. It shows you where you feel vulnerable, where you feel exposed, where you fear judgment. And those areas are important, not because they define you, but because they reveal where growth is needed, where healing is needed, where understanding is needed. So instead of rejecting the critic completely, you begin to use it differently. You hear it, but you don't follow it blindly. You question it. You examine it. You ask, where is this coming from? Is this true? Or is this familiar? Is this helping me or limiting me? And that inquiry creates depth, because now you are not just reacting to your mind. You are engaging with it, understanding it, working with it. And this is where integration begins, not by removing parts of yourself, but by bringing awareness to them, by understanding their function, their origin, their patterns. And in doing that, you reclaim something: authority, not control over the voice, but control over your response to it. And that is the shift from being controlled internally to becoming conscious internally, from being driven by patterns to recognizing them, from living as the false self to stepping into something more real, more grounded, more aligned. Because the true self does not need to dominate. It does not need to criticize constantly. It does not need to control every action. It is quieter, more stable, more grounded. And when you begin to access that part of yourself, the critic loses its central role. It becomes one voice, not the voice. And that changes everything, because now you are no longer defined by it. You are aware of it. And that awareness is what breaks the illusion that the voice in your head is who you are. At a certain point, you stop trying to silence the inner critic, and you start doing something far more powerful. You stop identifying with it, because the real problem was never the voice. It was the belief that the voice was you. And once that belief begins to break, everything shifts. You still hear it. It still appears. It still speaks in the same tone, the same patterns, the same judgments. But something is different now. You are not inside it. You are aware of it. And that awareness creates distance, a small gap between what is being said and how you respond. And in that gap, you begin to reclaim control, not control over the voice itself, but control over your reaction to it. Because according to Carl Jung, you cannot remove parts of the psyche by force. You integrate them. You understand them. You bring them into awareness. And in doing so, they lose their unconscious power. The inner critic does not disappear, but it changes. Its role shifts. Its intensity softens. Its authority weakens, because it is no longer unquestioned, no longer automatic, no longer dominant. And this is where a new relationship forms. You begin to hear the voice without immediately believing it. It says, "You're not ready." And instead of reacting, you notice it. You pause. You question it. You ask, "Is that true? Or is that familiar? Is this reality? Or repetition?" And that question alone disrupts the pattern, because the critic relies on certainty, on quick acceptance, on immediate belief. But when you slow it down, when you bring awareness into it, it loses momentum. It loses its grip. And this is how you begin to step out of the false self, not by destroying it, but by seeing through it. Because the false self is not something solid. It is a structure of patterns, thoughts, reactions, formed over time, maintained through repetition. And repetition can be broken, not all at once, but moment by moment. Each time the voice appears, you have a choice: to follow it, or to observe it, to believe it, or to question it, to shrink, or to move anyway. And those small moments matter more than anything else, because transformation does not happen in one decision. It happens in repeated awareness, repeated choice, repeated interruption of the pattern. You hear the voice, but you act anyway. You feel the doubt, but you move forward. You notice the fear, but you don't let it decide. And over time, something begins to change, not in the voice, but in you. You become less reactive, less controlled, less influenced, because the voice is no longer defining your behavior. You are. And that creates strength, a quiet strength, not based on confidence, but on awareness. You don't need the voice to disappear, to move forward. You don't need certainty to take action. You don't need to feel ready to begin, because you understand something deeper now. The voice was never a signal of truth. It was a pattern, a conditioned response. And once you see that, you stop waiting for it to change. Before you act, you stop trying to reach a state where it is silent, because that moment may never come. Instead, you move with it present. You act despite it. You live alongside it, without letting it control you. And this is where real freedom begins. Not in the absence of the critic, but in the absence of its authority. Because now, it is just a voice, not your identity, not your truth, not your limit, just a pattern that you can observe without obeying. And in that space, something deeper starts to emerge. A different voice, quieter, less aggressive, less urgent, but more real. The voice of your true self. It does not shout. It does not criticize. It does not pressure. It does not rush. It observes. It understands. It guides, without force, without fear, without judgment. And at first, it is hard to hear, because the critic has been louder for so long, more familiar, more dominant. But as you stop feeding the critic, as you stop reacting to it automatically, its volume decreases, its presence softens, and the quieter voice becomes clearer, more accessible, more stable. And this changes how you experience yourself. You feel less divided, less conflicted, less controlled, because you are no longer being pulled in different directions. You are centered, grounded, aware. And from that place, your actions change, not because you force them, but because your internal structure has shifted. You no longer act from fear, from avoidance, from self-doubt. You act from awareness, from choice, from presence. And this does not mean you become perfect, or fearless, or unaffected. The voice will still appear in moments of stress, of risk, of uncertainty. But now, it does not define you. It does not control you. It does not limit you, because you see it clearly for what it is. And that clarity is what frees you, because once you are no longer identified with the false self, you are no longer bound by its rules, its limits, its fears. You can step beyond them, not because they disappeared, but because you are no longer inside them. And this is what Jung pointed toward, not the removal of the unconscious, but the integration of it, the ability to see your patterns without being ruled by them, to hold awareness without losing yourself in it, to recognize the voices within you without confusing them for your identity. And when that happens, you return to something more stable, more grounded, more real, a sense of self that is not built on criticism, not built on fear, not built on limitation, but on awareness, presence, and choice. And that is the shift from being controlled by the inner critic to becoming conscious of it, from living as the false self to stepping into your true self, not perfectly, not instantly, but gradually, through awareness, through observation, through choosing differently, again and again, until the voice that once controlled you becomes just another sound in a mind that is finally yours. If that voice in your head felt a little too familiar, that's not random, that's conditioning. And according to Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it you. So here's the question you can't ignore. When that voice speaks, do you obey it? Or do you even notice it? They live their entire lives inside it, mistaking it for their identity, their truth, their limits. But now, you've seen it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the next time it tells you, you're not enough, you can't do this, you'll fail, pause. Don't fight it. Don't follow it. Just recognize it. Because that moment of awareness is the moment you take your power back. If you're ready to stop being controlled by that voice and start understanding your mind on a deeper level, subscribe. Because this isn't about silencing the critic. It's about finally realizing it was never you.